Morning, guys. How you doing? It's been a bit of a long day for me, long week. We haven't had hot water for a week. Whatever happened to it, the plumber came, didn't know shit. My brother came by, knew way more shit, but he's busy. So we had a new one sitting down there for 5 days now, waiting for him to install it. It was supposed to be today. We got pushed out to tomorrow. Thus, I'm making an episode today. I'm going to try to space them out at least a day or two in between. I'm not sure. We're trying to figure our way as we go. But that's life in general. I fancy myself a student of history. I've read a lot of history. I've studied a lot of geography and the movement of the lines of them on the map. I've always been fascinated by the colonial age, the age of exploration, the migration of humanity around the planet. It all, I feel, helps understand who I am and digs into my own place and purpose in this life. If I don't understand the last 500 years, 1,000 years, it's really hard for me to have perspective on the present. And I feel a lot of people have very little perspective on the present, but sure have a lot of commentary on the present. And that is very troubling to me. I'm sickened by something that is becoming more and more clear to me as I get older. And there's certain documentaries I like to watch, certain subjects. I'm a big fan of space. I'm a big fan of history and social politics. I'm a big fan of the oppression of groups and understanding how it gives them a moral authority. When you hold a group of people down for centuries, for generations, it allows them to have a moral compass and to know what justice and righteousness should look like. When you live kind of a pampered life, you can't really quantify what those things mean. That being said, I've been watching this documentary on Chicago. It's a documentary I've seen before, and I feel like documentaries are great because you can glean more information with every watch if it's a good documentary. This is a 10-hour piece, and it's discussing a lot of the labor wars of late 1800s. As the industrial age kicks in, the robber barons are rising to great wealth, the consolidation of monopolies. It's surpassing the political infrastructure. The people are so quick to blame government, and government is subverted by economics. Government doesn't have its own agenda. Government gets subverted by those with deeper pockets. And we are so willing to be like, oh, government has this conspiracy against us and the government's trying to hold us down. And guess who wants you to believe that? Those with the big pockets who want to keep government as powerless as possible. And one of the most shocking things to me is how, in our naivety, we've been convinced of what freedom is. And with every ounce of freedom as it's defined today, we become more slaves in chains. Freedom is just the opportunity for the elite to operate without the hindrance of government regulation. That's what freedom is. And Americans are out there going, woo, we love freedom, here's my flag. And with every ounce of freedom, the elite grasp the knife in our back sinks deeper. The less regulation there is on industry, the more our environments become destroyed, the more our lifestyle becomes factored in. They're taking away overtime, they're taking away the 8-hour workday, things that we fought hard for with labor and with unions, healthcare, sharing of the wealth, retirement, Social Security, all those things that the unions and the worker movement helped instill. That's all anti-freedom to the elite. And we're convinced that, yeah, we gotta fight for freedom no matter what that means, and we aren't smart enough to know what it means. And with every ounce of freedom they get, they take more of those real freedoms away from us. The freedom to have a decent pay, to have one parent be able to support so that one parent can raise the kids. We've had 2-3 generations now of two parents working, and look at the disaster that's causing. A listless generation of robot children depressed, anxious, and ready to kill themselves, so they don't end up being like their listless parents. The worker ant mentality that's being instilled in us, and we think that's freedom. I'm going back to the anthill. I'm going to go work for 12 hours today, get myself into the company store, and pay off some of my debt. We're so stupid. And we wonder why they take an education out of the school systems. And the Chicago documentary kind of draws it home. It doesn't say it in these terms, but it makes it clear that the struggle was between labor and the corporate bankers and elite. And it's the century of the 20th century, the late 19th century, and even in the last 20 years here, the struggle is between the worker and the rich. And the worker lost. We've lost so much of what was gained. And we're losing more of it all the time. And what the weaker the middle class becomes, the more frail the fabric of the nation becomes. And we allow nationalism to shape our thoughts so strongly that we lose our scope. And we think that whatever's best for the nation is what I'm in favor of. And oftentimes what's best for the nation isn't best for the nation. It's being best for the elite who rule the economics and policy of the nation. And so we're being told it's for America's best interest, but it's really for the rich's best interest. And throughout these labor problems in Chicago in the late 1800s, they used ethnicity and minorities and racism and fear and hatred to divide the classes. They subverted them at every chance they had. They arrested their people who wrote in their newspapers and talked about socialism and talked about the rise of the worker. This was a threat to the ruling robber barons. And they hung some of these, what they called militant anarchists. And most of them were just fighting for the worker, for the union. And the big robber barons wanted nothing to do with the unions. They would hire scab workers. They'd have police come in and shoot the minorities who were on strike. They would arm the police to the teeth so that the cops could use Gatling guns and cannons on striking employees. It was in the hog industry, it was in the cattle industry, it was in the lumber industry. It just keeps happening in Chicago over and over again. And there was this great bomb that went off. And it was the kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Penultimate moment in this conflict. And they ended up arresting a bunch of people that didn't have any connection or evidence against them and hung them. And many people around the world were fighting for clemency for these people because they hadn't done nothing wrong. They were peacefully assembling. No one knew who actually threw the incendiary device. And I'll guess it was someone being paid by the elite so they could subvert this movement. Then you see what's happening in the present today with minorities and protests and the complete control of the media to fumigate us, to have us so outraged all the time. And we see how nothing's fucking changed. It's insane watching 140, 50 years ago this process happening in Chicago between the Irish and the Polish and the Germans and the Italians. The blacks hadn't even made it to Chicago yet to take their bottom rung of the ladder. The Irish took that up at this point. And they didn't drink in each other's taverns. They had their own little parts of town. The conflict between them, even though they shared a common interest, and that was decent pay for decent work, the elite found ways to keep these groups at each other's throats. And to see it playing out today, it just makes me so sad and sickens my soul. Because we're here celebrating freedom, and the truth of the matter is, they don't want us being educated because we would soon realize the bad guys won. And the only reason why they don't want you to be educated is because they don't want you to see that the bad guys won. And anybody who becomes educated starts to look at the labor movement, starts to look at the rise of socialism. A lot of these immigrants were coming from socialist Eastern Europe. That was the enemy. It wasn't their ethnicity that was the enemy. It was their socialist ideologies. No, you ain't going to come here to America and destroy our profit margins by just demanding overtime. You ain't going to come to America, Mr. Catholic Pole, and demand 8-hour workdays and safety regulations. We don't want our profit margins hindered. And we will lynch, we will create riots, we will shoot you, we will hire replacement scab workers, we will do whatever we can to maintain freedom for economics to exist unfettered by the regulation of and the oversight of government. Us fearing government is one of the greatest coups d'etats in the history of mankind. Our aid, our partner is government. It represents us. And we do everything we can to keep making government less powerful. And we're convinced in everything we do and see that, oh, government has this big conspiracy. Government's not that smart. Government doesn't have that kind of foresight. Government doesn't have a secret hidden agenda. The people in that assembly change too frequently for them to be having any kind of common secret code. Most of them are idiots just trying to get a few more cattle dollars into their constituents' pockets. They have no global vision. They don't even have a national vision very often. And a lot of them get corrupted and take the payouts from the corporate elite. But it's not government that's behind any of it. And we need to recognize that government is our friend, and we need to retake democracy. But it's just sad to see how they were fixing elections, how they were dividing the streets, using chaos, using riots, using the press, all to subvert anything that would stand in the way of their economic profits. And they'll call you a terrorist if you're a Catholic Irishman in Chicago in 1885. They'll call you a terrorist if you're in the Middle East trying to save your resources for your own people. They'll call you a terrorist if you're here in America now, protesting what they see as the injustice of economics. They'll tear gas your ass. They'll put people in the crowd to create riots, to loot, to shoot, to demonize the movements, to illegitimize the movements, so that the scared people back home go, oh, we got to stop these crazy anarchists trying to make change. How dare you make change in a democracy? How dare you try to stir change in our republic? The status quo was just fine. And that's why they need us scared. So all that we ever say is, please keep me safe. Please keep me safe. Protect me from the blacks and Mexicans, the Russians, the Chinese. Don't forget the Arabs, the Muslims, the gays, and the Mexicans. I'm so scared of everything. Ah, you're not white. You're not Christian. I'm scared. You're not American. You must be dark, evil. Americans know so little about the rest of the world. It's by design. They don't want you to see the bad guys won. Greed won. Greed subverted the labor movement. Greed subverted socialism and communism. Greed subverted communal sharing, caring about each other. And it's used the racial ignorance of divided people at every step of the way to keep us from unifying and recognizing maybe this isn't in our common interests. So anyway, I've seen this documentary probably 3 times. But every time you watch something, your understanding, your grasp of things has broadened some since you saw it last. And new things kind of click. And seeing the past being so revisited in the present, it just has my stomach sick. Sick. I struggle to find the words at times. Let's dig in. 1960 Part 2. Something I gotta get that stuff off my chest. Mr. Armstrong would wish it was so. These guys were freedom fighters. These guys stood up against totalitarianism. These guys stood for the everyday man. My social, economic, political, psychological, my philosophy, it's all aligned with the movement and the statements of the oppressed black male. what they have to say is as powerful as what Moses had to say, Solomon had to say, what Jesus Christ has to say. And he overthrew the money changers in the temple. He once said, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man into the kingdom of heaven. I don't even got to know you, but I can see that money in your pocket has some blood on your hands. You can't accrete too much wealth without creating a great crime or a great sin at some point. Moving on, 1960, Prestige. It's an incredible run. Riverside and Blue Note we just covered in part 1, and it's a pretty incredible year for what's happening there. And at Prestige, the same thing is absolutely present. If you recall and follow me at all, you know that by now Prestige is firmly with 2 different lines of LPs. There's the 7000 series that's doing soul jazz and has some of the bigger names still on it, like some Coltrane titles are still coming out on the 7000 series. And then there's the 8200 series, which is the new jazz lineage, and it's more modern, hints of the avant-garde, edgier stuff. And they've given it 2 separate labels. What's still on 7000 series for the most part is going to be this. Blues-driven, not composition-driven, more feel-driven. That's probably Bill Jennings right there, yeah. Bill Jennings to me. You know, yes sir. Yes sir, brother. I feel you, I hear you. His 2 records on Prestige are outstanding. He does a lot of side work with guys like Jack McDuff. This is 71, 74, and that's about the stretch where Prestige is at in 1960. 71, 65 through about 7200 is about where they're at in 1960. Outstanding record, and this is all about the blues. You know what I'm saying? Just all about the blues. And that's the last song on the side. I'm guessing it's Drowsy. No, it's light blues, side 2, I guess, I put on. Beautiful stuff. You can just feel the sorrow and how it's lifting their spirits, helping them get through. In the same vein, to some degree, is Boss Tenor by Gene Ammons, number 7180. I found this in Rockford, Illinois a couple years ago. Beautiful old pressing of that. This record has Tommy Flanagan, Doug Watkins, Arthur Taylor, and Ray Barretto. The Congo has a bit of a Cubano Latin feel. It was absolutely outstanding stuff. It's a lovely first pressing. It's in very nice condition. These records you can find for a fairly reasonable price. You know, I was $60 for a really nice version of this first pressing. It's where the 7000 series is at this point. This is, of course, now the Ammons record. Flanagan's just wonderful. Watkins and Taylor just laying down that solid, simple groove in the background. This is exactly what 7071 this era is about. Soul Junction 7181. This is one of a couple records that the Red Garland Trio adds horn players, and they add, I believe it's Donald Byrd, yeah, and John Coltrane. And of course, Coltrane is a familiar guy to Red from them working together with Miles Davis. And Miles has dismissed Red by this point because he was late one day and just fired him. You know, just hired Wynton Kelly. And when Red showed up, he's like, "You're done." Thanks, Miles. Great guy you are. Spoiled ass middle class brat, what he is. And, you know, he felt how the black community never really embraced him because of his middle class upbringing, and how the whites no matter how wealthy he was, they still saw him as a nigger. You know? And that's the sad reality of Miles Davis. He was a guy on the outside all the time. And it affects his demeanor. And I think he's got some bitterness towards the blacks who don't accept him, and resentment against the whites, who of course would never accept him in this country. Coltrane, Bird, Arthur Taylor, and George Joyner rounds up this session on the bass. This is outstanding stuff. And this is actually atypical for what 7180, 7190 Prestige was about. Having Coltrane on a session here, it's still kind of in the traditional lineage, so it fits. But like I said, when you look at what's at the New Jazz imprint at this point, this probably almost fits better there. But there's not a clear definition of what's going to be New Jazz and what's going to be Prestige at this point. And it's essentially the same thing. You know, I'm sure some of it was for organization, but some of it was probably also for tax reasons. You split your revenues between two titles. It allows you to rearrange your tax revenues. This is a tough record to come by, and in part because Bird and Coltrane are on it. But I love Red Garland's work from '56 right through the '60s on Prestige, and his few titles with Coltrane are some of the most expensive titles in his discography. Number 7187 is the great Betty Rochet. I'm told that's how it's said, Betty Rochet. I've also thought it was Betty Roche, but it sounds like it's French, Cajun perhaps, Betty Rochet. But she's a great singer, and she's really comes to fame for being the voice on one of the famous recordings of Ellington's Take the A Train. And when that was first done, she first worked with Ellington, there was a recording band in place. And so the version of her with the vocals on her didn't get recorded. It was like in '42 or something. And that's when she's with Ellington. And she ends up coming back to Ellington's group in the early 51, I think it is. And they actually get to track it with her singing it. And that comes out on the Ellington Uptown. It's on a few other sessions as well. His discography is very convoluted. But that's her, Betty Rochet. And Prestige gives her 2 records. This one, another one that comes out about 13 releases later. That's also outstanding. They're both pretty tough to come by. Again, it's gospel blues. She has one other session on Bethlehem where she actually does take the A Train again. And it's not as good as these 2 Prestige sessions, if you ask me. And my copy's not the best sounding. Maybe that's part of the problem. But these 2 Prestige Betty Rochet records are outstanding. Just, you'll sit down and you'll feel what the blues is. It's going to stick in your craw, and it's going to hurt a little bit. And what's great, when she's done expressing the hurt, she actually feels better. That's what the blues is. And to me, when composition takes over and takes the blues out of it, the music suffers so greatly. And with the simplicity comes the dancing. And with the dancing comes the sex in the audience. And you strip away that audience and make it more about ego and compositional driven composing. It's no wonder the audience left. I don't want to dance to Cecil Taylor. I don't even really want to dance to a lot of what Hancock and McLean and those guys were doing. That stuff became a lot more study focus group jazz. And it's insane, it's intense, but it's not going to have the audience that a Count Basie 1 o'clock jump's going to have, where people can mingle and dance and have a good time. Because at the end of the day, most of us are chasing a nut like a squirrel. We want that interaction, that human connection. We want to be close to another body, feel the love and warmth and affection of someone else finding value in me. And that's where ego and self-worth comes from. And the blues was always that. It's like, no matter how much shit sucks today, honey, at least I found you tonight. Believe that. That's that's the essence of it. Thank God I can find a way to make love tonight to somebody, because I need it. My soul hurts, my mind is exhausted, my heart is broken, I'm tired of struggling. My legs and my feet hurt from my day of labor. I need some affection. And the black community does leave jazz in the modern era. And the more compositional and out jazz became, the less the black audience paid any attention to it. And in a lot of ways, a lot of the composition of this era was being driven by guys like Mulligan and Joffrey, who were great composers and arrangers. Anyway, Coltrane, Lush Life. This comes out after he left Prestige. He's now at Columbia from 1960. It comes out in 1960. It was recorded in 1957. Some of his most beautiful songs are on here. He plays a number of ballads. And I think when you hear Coltrane playing ballads at this point with Bird, Garland, Chambers, Louis Hayes, Earl Mays on some of these tracks, Arthur Taylor. So it's from a few different sessions. But there's the beauty and spirituality of the man. And again, that speaks volumes about who he is and where he's coming from. This isn't a game. This is dead serious. I'm trying to find a way for not just myself, but for my people to find a promised land. I know Canaan's just over one of those river hills, and we're going to get there someday, but I need to keep looking. I don't got time for nothing else. My time here on this earth is too short. You can't go wrong with Coltrane's 57, 58 output. It's really beautiful and sincere. He does have the sheets of sound thing going on some of the up-tempo numbers, but when he gets into a mid-tempo or a ballad, he's as an expressive a player as Coleman Hawkins, Lester Young. He can be a very beautifully motor when his emoting is coming from a more calm place. Mose Allison is one of the more underappreciated guys in the Prestige catalog, which means you can get his records often pretty affordably. You can find old pressings of Moses stuff for 30, 40 bucks. Nowadays, the internet's kind of made all that go out the window, and sometimes you'll see his records online for 120. No one's paying that. You know, if you're paying 120 bucks for a Mose Allison Prestige record, you weren't very patient. For the most part, these records don't go for huge bucks. But he's a very interesting player. And I think he's been in the monk school. He's got some sparseness. He doesn't have quite the edges of monk, but he certainly has some interesting compositional skills. He's also an interesting singer. And he'll sing the blues, and he does some nice stuff on this record with Ronnie Free and Addison Farmer. And I just listened to it yesterday and shared it on my Facebook Jazz Vinyl Club. If you're not a member, you should join that. I've been trying to post more stuff there again lately, as I'm not making as much YouTube content. But Mose is a great player. One of the solid white guys that Prestige kind of works with a lot in this point. Another record I played yesterday and posted in my Facebook group was this John Wright Southside Soul. And John Wright is a brilliant player and very rooted in the gospel blues, man. You know, he's a Chicago guy. He stayed in the Chicago scene until like 2017. But he makes 4 or 5 records on Prestige here, all in the same era, 60, 61. And he doesn't do a lot else as a leader. He goes back to Chicago and kind of works with blues ensembles and promotes the music from a very grassroots kind of place. Unlike what's happening in new jazz, this is firm. And it's not even soul. It's just firm blues jazz. It's got elements of the Three Sounds, Gene Harris. He's about to pocket. He wants that groove to carry his playing along like a kid in a water park. You just slide down the trails, buddy. real easy to do. Wendell Roberts, Walter McCants round this out. I think his backing band kind of switches up a little bit over the course of these 5 records. But the first 4 I have. The 5th one didn't come out till much later, if I recall. The first 4 are all outstanding. Nice and tasty. I love them all. I really do. And John Wright is some of the great stuff at Prestige at this point. So those 7 records kind of show you where the 7000 series was. Now we're going to dive into where the New Jazz was. 8236, Eric Dolphy, Outward Bound. And you hear right off the bat that what's happening at New Jazz has a little more anxiety to it, a little more searching for the avant-garde. You know, nothing they do here is going to be too out, but he certainly dabbles, Dolphy especially, really is experimental for what Bob Weinstock normally would allow. And I think he's a big part of why they said we need to have a separate imprint for some of this new young stuff the kids are putting out. Dolphy's an LA guy. I did a great episode on him about 2 months ago. Worth watching if you haven't seen it. He's a super innovative guy. And he strongly influences the avant-garde and even guys like Ornette Coleman and John Coltrane. And he has a big role with Mingus at a point. He helps shape things on the West Coast. Then he comes east and starts shaking things up there. He has a pretty famous Blue Note from 63, 64, Out to Lunch. Young Freddie Hubbard's on this. This Open Sesame came out the same year. He's tearing this up. And Jackie Byers on the piano, again another Mingus alumni. George Tucker and the great Roy Haynes. Outstanding stuff. Here we got some flutes. It feels a little bit more modern, a little bit more soundtrack driven. If it sounds more like it could be in a film somewhere, and there's pixies in a forest, and they're dancing in the sunlight, and there's a wizard approaching on a white horse, that's not the blues. That's composition. That's it's a different branch of the art. And it has value in its own way, but it's just different. I love Green Dolphin Street on here. And again, you can see that's a little bit more edgy than anything. That's interesting right there. That's got to be the bass clarinet. That was wonderful. It's a little edgier than what's happening at the 7000 series for sure. Doug Watkins, Solnick is a fantastic record. I also listened to this yesterday. I'm trying to preview stuff before I do my episodes, just to kind of even further define for me what was the sound in 60. Watkins played some great bass cello, real wonderful melodic, minor keys at times, wonderful stuff. I don't want to make this record episode go too long. Oliver Nelson, at this point, 59, 60, 61, is doing some pretty cutting edge stuff for Prestige, New Jazz. And again, it's along the lines of what we hear with Dolphy. It's got some edges to it. It's not just brothers jamming to the blues. It's composition heavy. It's music of the movement, you know. There's some gospel in that right there. Dolphy's on this. Richard Williams is on this. Who's on the trumpet? Richard Williams, duh. I thought Richard Davis. But it's a nice sorrow in that. Great stuff. This is before he gets into the heavy arranging for Impulse and Verve that comes later in the 60s. At this point, he's still pretty much a fiery player. And this stuff like Afro Sketches, 59, all this stuff here, it's just a bit of a different sound than what's happening at the 7000 series. G.G. Greif's Happenings, another great record, tough one to come by. He's playing here with Richard Williams again on the trumpet. Julian Ewell, Richard Wyans, and Granville Mickey Roker. An early appearance for Mickey Roker. Hard record to come by. Looking ahead, Ken McIntyre with Eric Dolphy once again. So you can see that Weinstock's putting all the edgier kids, all the kids that are pushing the boundaries, they're all being relegated to new jazz. And I think about the new jazz stuff, I don't think it gets near the Prestige 7000 series stuff does. And they also, a lot of them didn't get reissued in the OJC series. Some do, you know, the Dolphy stuff does. But there's a lot of titles in new jazz that are either available as original pressings, maybe second pressings, and then Japanese reissues. And so it makes some of the Gigi Groyce, some of the Benny Golson, some of these titles are very expensive, very tough to come by. But there's a pretty different feel between the edges of what we're hearing here and what that Jack McDuff, Betty Rochet stuff was telling us. So in 1960, Bethlehem is pretty much at the end of their road. And they've sold to King Records out of Cincinnati, who of course has James Brown. King does stuff that's fairly R&B tinted. You know, the great sax player that Coltrane plays with out of Philly. I'm tipping my tongue. Can't think of it right now. Earl Bostic. That's kind of typical King fare. But King also had some decent stuff in the vaults that they reissued at the Bethlehem logo. And this Pepper Adams session, and it's really not a Pepper Adams record. It's billed to Pepper Adams, Donald Byrd, Kenny Burrell, Flanagan, Hay Lewis, which I think is Lewis Hayes, and Paul Chambers. So it's kind of a group effort, but Pepper Adams, in some circles, he's getting the lead billing on this now. Some people give it to Donald Byrd. It doesn't really matter. It's one of the reasons why I miss filing my records by label is because this would be number Bethlehem 6056 at that point, and it would fit right where it belongs. When it now is under an artist, I gotta choose whose name am I gonna use to file this under. And then I gotta think in my mind, if I want to find it, where did I put that Motor City Scene record again? Oh, I think I put it under Pepper Adams. Maybe Donald Byrd, could have been Kenny Burrell, and I'm sure over the years I've had it in all three of their sections. So when I had it filed by label, it was always Bethlehem 6056. Just went there it was. Another guy that shows up in the scene and makes a pretty big splash in 1960 is Booker Adams. Booker Irvin, sorry. I'm thinking Pepper Adams. Booker Irvin shows up here. And I'm going to show you 3 records by Booker Irvin here in 1960 on 3 different labels. And they're all kind of small distributed labels. He has this Bethlehem session that I'm guessing was recorded by King. But Tommy Turntine, Tommy Flanagan, Danny Richmond, and George Tucker recorded in June 1960. I don't think that Gus Wilde and company have anything to do with it anymore. Anyway, it's a great record. Again, it's got an interesting lineup. And even the lineup doesn't really tell you what label stable that's part of. Because the traditional Bethlehem stable of musicians, none of those guys show up here after about 60-35. All the greats that were there in the 10-inch era, in the early LP era, in the BCP series, none of those guys show up in the 6000 series after about 60-35. It's all just kind of various random artists that don't feel affiliated with Bethlehem at all, and for the most part they really weren't. Still, it's a great record. You hear the Texas tenorman Booker Irvin really coming into his own. He's going to make a pretty big splash on the scene, and then he's going to sign with Prestige shortly after these. And at Prestige, he makes some great records. The Space Book, the Blues Book, the Song Book. Those are all outstanding. I love Booker Irvin. He's really, for me, he gives you an idea of where Coltrane's track could have gone. And people often will attribute Coltrane to being influenced by Coleman and even Dolphy and Saunders. But I think the biggest influence on Coltrane was his mortality. His waning health, I think, is what pushed him into the exploration of trying to find the light. You know, the fear of mortality, the fear of the unknown can make you pick up your horn and go, what the fuck, I can't, it can drive you. And some of the madness he's playing is a guy not sure of his destination. What lies beyond this mortality? We don't know. Coltrane didn't know. He sure as hell looked to find out. And what you hear him doing with My Favorite Things and Giant Steps and the kind of conscious, social, spiritual stuff he was doing, by the time he's at Impulse, it's a life and death thing. And he's diving into all the spiritual realms of Om and Kula Se Mama and Ascension. Think about those titles. They're all dealing with his soul and his spirit, and it's that pushes Coltrane where he went. And I think if he hadn't become ill, he probably would have stayed much more in the blues, much more centered, much less out there, 63, 4, 5, 6. You know, that's just my opinion. But as a human being, I know when fear motivates my art. Early days of the pandemic, you know, I was like, oh, I'm going to pick up my guitar and soothe my soul. I'm going to play the piano and just, it soothes you. And so I don't think there's any way Coltrane wasn't trying to calm his fears as his health waned. This is on Savoy now, and tough record to find an original pressing of. And Savoy, by this late, 12/154, it's very near the end for them too. They have a sporadic title here and there. There's some Bill Hardman's. There's a great Bill Hardman record, which I just got in '61. There's some stuff still coming out. There's a great record by Cecil Payne, Patterns, which I haven't been able to track down yet. But Savoy's definitely towards the end of their great jazz run. They're going to start reissuing a lot of their early mono 12,000 series stuff with different covers in stereo formats. Savoy stuff can often appear within the 12,000 sequence 2-3 times. And there's a lot of reissuing going on by this point. Tanganyika Strut, the Little Jimmy Scott. These records all have multiple numbers, sometimes with the same cover, sometimes with different covers. And again, Savoy's slowly working its way towards a much more gospel, black soul, black gospel. It's kind of where they go. You know, even like church choir, black choir music, that's kind of where Savoy's heading. There's still some good titles in jazz coming out, but they become much more sporadic. The third Booker Irvin record in 1960 is on another new label that pops up, Candid. And Candid is a very progressive label out of New York. They're doing pretty edgy stuff. They're on probably a pretty limited budget. So they're issuing live stuff that they can get their hands on. Candid stuff, for me, can have a fairly wide range in sound quality. Some of it is pretty rough. Others is really beautiful. Again, Booker to me is a little light into where I think Coltrane could have gone had his life gone differently. And we have no control over that. You know, we just don't. Coltrane path took him where it did, and he had to fight his demons. And we can't fault him for that. But Booker certainly gives us an idea of where a guy with that tone, that force, that spiritual light in another universe could have gone. Candid is doing stuff like this. We insist. Max Roach. Max Roach is doing Freedom Now, on Riverside. On Candid, he has a little bit more license to be even more controversial. And this record, believe it or not, has the great Coleman Hawkins on it. Abby Lincoln shrieks and moans throughout it in just agony, expressing the sorrow of her people. It's a pretty incredible lineup, actually, when you look at it closely, that Max assembles here. Let's see here. Where's the listing? Coleman Hawkins is the name that's really shocking here. But it shows you how Coleman Hawkins, even as an old guy, was always part of the cutting edge. He's one of the leading guys in starting the bebop movement. People don't recognize that. One of the first bebop recordings was a Coleman Hawkins-led session. Hawkins was never afraid to be part of the edges of the music. Julian Priester's on this, who's a very avant-garde guy coming up here in the late 60s. Booker Little, who is a great Max Roach partner. James Schenk is on this on the bass. Walter Benton, a tenor saxophone, a great West Coast sax player. It's not a comfortable record. This is civil rights on an LP. It's African, it's political, it's social, it's exhausted, it's furious, it's edgy. One of the true turning points in jazz here in 1960 is We Insist. And I don't think it's sold very well. I don't think anything on Candid sold really well. But with the musicians and in infamy and in retrospect, it's become a real leader of the edge avant-garde movement. This is Booker Little now, who of course was playing with Max Roach after I gotta check something real quick here. Sounds like it's warbling a little bit there. It's nice and tight. I think my needle might be going. Yeah, my needle's going. Booker Little played with Clifford Brown. Played with Max Roach after Clifford Brown passed. Kenny Dorham also fills that chair at times. But Booker Little's a fierce player. One of the great trumpet players that people kind of don't know much about. And he passes in '62, so he doesn't have a big legacy. But what he did record with Max Roach and then on his own, and with a few other people as well, it's absolutely worth seeking out. It's so Candid between the Max Roach, between the Booker Little, between the Charles Mingus records. They're doing some pretty edgy stuff. Both this Mingus presents Charles Mingus and just this Mingus record. Jimmy Neppard, Ted Curson, Booker Irvin, Eric Dolphy, Britt Woodman, Danny Richmond. These are both pretty edgy, avant-garde. Really kind of illuminates where the music was going. So, Candid shows up on the scene here, and they make a pretty big splash. And I'm a pretty big fan of a lot of this stuff. I don't listen to it as much as I once did, but this is 1960. This is what's happening to the music. It's changing fast and rapidly. And civil rights is helping push that along. Last in this episode is the arrival of Impulse. Creed Taylor has been at ABC for a couple of years. He was at Bethlehem in 55, 56, 57, helped arrange and produce a lot of great records there. In 58, he goes to ABC. And he helps produce some great sessions there as well, kind of as a self-made producer. And he convinces ABC to launch a jazz-only imprint called Impulse with deluxe gatefolds and a lovely laminated cover. And by late 1960, I think mid-November or so, they simultaneously release their first 4 titles. And the notion that Impulse was nothing but an avant-garde label is completely false. And Coltrane certainly was a big coup for them to sign and help convince ABC to take this chance. But they don't even allow Coltrane's first record to come out right away. Africa Brass was not exactly how they wanted to launch this label. And so if you look at the first 4 titles that came out for holiday shoppers to consume, because of the lovely gatefold, they actually got Kai and JJ to reunite here. They were together 54, 55, 56 at Columbia, making some great records at that point that sold pretty well. And they had since gone their separate ways, and they convinced them to make this record together here as Impulse #1. And it's a great session. Bill Evans is on it, Tommy Williams is on it, Roy Haynes, Art Taylor, and Paul Chambers. Bill Evans must be courtesy of Riverside, I'm guessing. Beautiful, luxurious, coffee table worthy packaging. The big orange and black spine. Impulse's splash on the scene is of course very impressive. The second release was Ray Charles, Genius plus Soul equals Jazz. And his version of One Mint Julep on here is fantastic. Quincy Jones does a lot of the arranging on this. Brother Ray can play. You know, he's also doing a lot of poppy stuff at Atlantic, and now ABC has just hired him away from Atlantic. And ABC does a lot of great Ray Charles soul records in the 60s. Atlantic is his home in all the 50s. He makes great records there. But when he goes to ABC, he makes incredible soul records in the 60s at ABC. But at Impulse, he does this record, and it's outstanding. Impulse #2. Impulse #3 was this Kai Winding record, the incredible Kai Winding trombones. And the #4 was them capitalizing on the success of Gil Evans and Miles Davis, by giving Gil Evans Out of the Cool. And there's no doubt in my mind that the success of Sketches of Spain in early 1960, the successes of Porgy and Bess, Miles Ahead, they were like, okay, Ray Charles would be a great choice. We'll use Kai Winding and J.J. Johnson. Those guys have pretty big fame. And Gil Evans, his name is everywhere with Miles Davis at this point. And so they give him #4. And so these are the first 4 titles that come out on Impulse for Christmas of 1960. John Coles, Elvin Jones, Charlie Persip, Ron Carter, Bill Barber, Jimmy Knepper, Ray Crawford, Bud Johnson. It's a pretty amazing ensemble here. But those 4 records come out simultaneously, and it gives you a much clearer image of the broadness of what Impulse was going to be willing to do. And Africa Brass comes shortly after this. I believe #5 is Oliver Nelson's Blues and the Abstract Truth, which is a true masterpiece and an avant-garde precursor. So Impulse does do a wide range of stuff, from bluesy Ben Webster to out there Oliver Nelson, some of the most extreme John Coltrane, and then Pharoah Saunders and Archie Shepp. But they're also doing a lot of great traditional throwback guys like P.B. Russell. So there's a pretty wide spectrum of what Impulse is going to do. McCoy Tyner's records are outstanding. Max Roach makes a couple great records. Mingus makes a couple great records. Sonny Rollins. But these first 4 come out in 1960. So that wraps up part 2. In part 3, we're going to take a look at what Columbia, Atlantic, what the Chicago labels were doing, what the LA labels were doing. We're also going to take a look at another little label that comes up, Time Records. And they have some really cool titles. So we're going to dig into all that in a couple days. I get time to record it. Hopefully I get my hot water back later tomorrow. Talk to you guys soon. Much love. Again, peace, love, understanding, empathy. Empathy is impossible without understanding. So let's be tolerant of each other by trying to understand where we come from. And for the most part, everybody just wants their kids home safe at night and food in their children's stomachs. Take that home with you tonight. Much love, Louis Armstrong. We love you, one of the greats of all time. Peace.